critical thinking will You're about to hear a revolution in talk radio. Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts. And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Today, we're pleased to have a returning guest, Mr. Daniel McAdams. He's the executive director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Daniel served as a foreign affairs, civil liberties, and defense policy advisor to Congressman Ron Paul from 2001 until his retirement at the end of 2012. And he also served as a journalist. He was based in Budapest, Hungary, and traveled throughout the former communist bloc as a human rights monitor and election observer. That must have been some heck of a job. During our live broadcast, we encourage you to call 646-652-4620. That's 646-652-4620. And please do press the 1 button so we know that if you're listening in that you want to break in, ask a question, or make a comment, and we'll take your call. Daniel, welcome to Liberty Talk Radio.
Hey, Joe, thanks for having me back. It's great to be with you.
Well, right now you are probably looking at, via the screen, that probably the most frustrated libertarian on the face of the earth. And I'm sure many libertarians are saying the same thing. It seems that our entire country has gone to hell in a handbasket. And when I read your introduction, you said you were in the former Soviet bloc. It seems that we are gravitating more and more to that form of government, that structure of society, by virtue of the fact that we're so bifurcated here in America today. You have a policeman shoots a person, and many times justifiably, and there are riots in the street. Well, obviously there's a lot of pent-up anger, a lot of pent-up frustration. There is a feeling of being locked in and not being able to make any headway in the society. Then you have the political arena, which is totally bifurcated in this country, where you have those people who feel that they need government to survive. And then they have the other fraction, the fraction that I'm in, saying, boy, I wish government would go in the Pacific Ocean, the deepest part, and sink itself and drown, and we never see it again, and leave me alone. I can do it on my own. And it seems that this chasm is opening up wider and wider. I don't see a happy ending to this. Added to that, by the way, we also have an economic situation which may collapse under its own weight, and a currency which may lose its status as the world's reserve currency, which will entirely create havoc throughout the financial system, throughout the United States, the world, by the way, and the banking system would collapse altogether. So all this happy news that I'm giving you, what say you?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And I think the evidence of this fracturing of society is the presidential campaign thus far. You've had an outsider, a populist, someone who's able to channel the anger of the population. I'm talking about Donald Trump. But on the Democrat side, you had the same phenomenon with Bernie Sanders. So they were able to tap into this anger. People are frustrated. They're angry with the way things are going. And, these politicians have been able to tap into that. But I think they're obviously missing the point as to what's really wrong with society. But the anger is definitely there, and that, I think, explains this phenomenon. This has been the strangest electoral year that I have ever seen. Right. Sometimes I wonder if it's a reality show or if I'm out of touch with reality. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah. This riot now in North Carolina is just a repeat. This is kumbaya. Here we are again. We're going through this again, time after time after time. We tend to want to discuss about the symptoms. We don't want to talk about the cause of what's causing these things. And it's easy to see what the cause is, but the politicians will not discuss the cause, because if we discuss the cause, we'll be being disrespectful to the decisions that they made. They'd be criticizing themselves. So the only way out is to make the situation even worse. This adds to my frustration.
Yeah, and I think the elites want to simplify the problems with police in the United States. They want to define it in terms of color. They want to define it in terms of class. And it makes it very easy for them, because if they can divide and conquer this way, the George Soroses of our society can pit people against each other. It keeps the elites, I think, in power, and the deep state in power. But I think, how you and I probably would see it, if I can speak for you, is very, very different problem. And we have a problem with the militarization of the police. We have a problem with war veterans coming back and taking jobs as police when they have the mentality of being warriors, and it's very difficult. And nobody wants to talk about this. You're right. You have Homeland Security getting all sorts of military equipment and giving it to police forces. You'll have some tiny police force in the middle of nowhere with a huge tank. It's almost a joke. But they don't want to talk about that. They'd rather divide people. They'd rather talk about race and class, and really stir things up, like you said.
Yeah, and it's really not race, and it's not class, it's not money, it's not jobs. What it is, it's the obstacles that prevent people from acting individually. And you never hear the term individual. The individual is responsible for themselves. The family is responsible for the children. The family is responsible for the education. We don't want to put responsibility where it belongs, and the responsibility is with the people, not with the government. I want the government out of everything. And I suspect with technology the way it's going, where today you can get everything, any piece of information in the world on your smartphone, it's going to render the whole school system, already absolutely obsolete. Kids can get a better education staying home, reading stuff on their iPhone that can ever get in class. That should simplify things, but you'll never see that, but that's one of our answers.
Well, that's a great point, but the state control of schools is critical to creating the next generation of robots who do what they say, or do what they're told, and think as they're told, and not think outside the box. But I think that's not to change the subject, but you're right, that's the example of why the homeschooling movement is growing so much. And my kids are on the Ron Paul curriculum, for example, and they're taught to think a very, very different way from kids in the public schools. And, I only worry what happens when they come in contact, because it's a completely different frame of reference.
Yeah. I was at a business meeting Tuesday morning, just this week, and the facilitator of the meeting talked about an article written by a gentleman from Singularity University, and he talked about the technology and how fast it was migrating exponentially, and the technology was taking over the many tasks that humans do today. It was absolutely scary, but it was real. I remember when I bought my first computer, it had, I think, 8K of memory, 8,000. I mean, really. And then I remember the big day, the big time when the 64K. What was the name of that computer? The 64K. The
Commodore or something, or
I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, it was 64K. We thought that was the ultimate. You can't fit any more in that box. More than 64K. And so we've graduated from that type of progression, the exponential progression, to going from gigabytes to terabytes to whatever. Now we're going to whatever I don't even know what the next level is, but in a compressed period of time, but exponentially larger by the trillions. And it's not going to be long until robots will be doing most of the work that humans are doing. And this bodes very poorly for those people who are now in the street demanding jobs, because the jobs are not there, they're going away. And our government is just making it more difficult for businesses to create jobs because they're regulating businesses. Jobs are going away. More people are taking to the street. I see it. Why can't anyone else see that?
Yeah, and don't forget the other issue of the guaranteed minimum wage. You just price a bunch of low-skilled people out of the market. You tell people whose work is only worth $12 an hour, sorry, you can't work. Your $12 an hour skills are not useful in society. So you create people that have nothing to do but get to the street with these ridiculous minimum wage laws.
Yeah. You know, when I was young, 1842, something like that. It was a long time ago. But I remember on Castle Hill Avenue in the Bronx, there was a camera store. And I was just fascinated by cameras. And this is when cameras actually took regular pictures with film and stuff like that. And I went to this guy. His name was Bernie. Bernie, the camera store. Yeah, he owned it. And I went in there. He didn't know me from Adam. I said, I want a job. He says, I don't need anybody. I said, no, I want to work for nothing. He said, what do you mean? I said, I want to work here. I love cameras. I want to work here. They'll pay me. At school, just give me 2-3 hours. I really want to work here. He thought it was nuts. Well, he did. He hired me. And I never asked him for pay, but every Saturday he would give me a few dollars, And I was enough to go out that night with my friends and have a great time. I loved it. Today, he would be serving 20 years in jail. But I learned so much by being behind a counter. I learned how to run a cash register, how to balance it, inventory. I learned a lot about cameras that I just loved. I loved photography, and I did all sorts of stuff with it. And it was a learning experience for me. Never asked for a paycheck, always gave me something on the side. Today, the guy would be in jail. He would be a hardcore criminal.
Yeah, it's terrible. And it's how cruel is it to the people that you're purporting to help? That's the tragedy of the welfare state. It's the cruelest to the people that they're purporting to help, because it's not about helping people. It's about gaining power over people and manipulating people.
Yeah. If I have a couple of businesses, and one is an occupational health testing business, and it's a great job for someone who wants to enter the employment market, because we can take someone and train them from scratch, and they can become technician, and we'll pay for their schooling, their certifications, and they can make some good money and do a lot with it. But if a minority came to me and said, Mr. Cristiano, I want to work for you, and I said, I'm sorry, I don't need anybody. He said, well, I just want to tell you that if not hiring me would be the biggest mistake you've ever made. I said, well, I can't afford to bring you on. I got to pay you so much an hour. It's going to cost me about $20 an hour with all the, all the thing that goes with it. And I said, plus I have to take one of my technicians to help train you. It's going to cost me $40 an hour. I can't do it. And he says, no, I don't want pay. I want to do this for free for 3 weeks. And after 3 weeks, you tell me whether or not it's the biggest mistake not to hire me. I would hire the guy. I would say, all right, not because I want to get someone for free. It would actually take time from me. He would be totally unproductive. But I would gamble on that guy. But today what would happen, if I did that, my fear would be, he's going to go to somebody in the government and say, hey, this guy's not paying me. I'm in jail. So I tell the guy, there's the door. Don't let it kick you in the ass. And then that's it. The conversation's over.
Yeah, and that may be, as you point out, that may be your best employee, because look how motivated he is.
Absolutely, and I can't touch him.
You could have a 3-foot stack of resumes with all the greatest, qualifications. This happened a lot on the Hill, to be honest. Everyone has beautiful resumes, fantastic, so much experience. The head of this club, the president of this, that, and the other, and they come in and they can't do a doggone thing.
Yeah.
And you have some kid come in who is so eager and so excited and so much wants to work. That turns out to be the best employee.
Yeah. Well, these people have drive. They have vision. They drive and vision. People who have degrees say, well, you sort of owe me a job because look at this degree. I got a good mark in, sociology, so you should hire me. And their attitude is totally different. They sort of expect something because they went to school. They paid $72,000 to get a degree in worthlessness. Mm-hmm. Let's change the subject a second. Gary Johnson is running as a libertarian. He's not nearly as libertarian as Dr. Ron Paul. He's okay, but he ain't my favorite. I hate saying that. I'm going to vote for him because he's I'd say lesser of 3 evils, but I mean, he's okay. But he misses the mark in too many cases, and it just bothers me. Who's educating Gary Johnson? Who's coaching Gary Johnson on the issues? Because he's missing the mark too often.
Well, I don't think it's anyone in our camp, but you're right. It's a real tragedy because this should be the best year for libertarians, bar none. With a good, solid, a real libertarian candidate, with a Democrat and the Republican running, this should be the year to beat all years. But unfortunately, what you have are essentially two liberal Republicans who are masquerading as libertarians, who sprinkle a little bit of libertarian flavor, and Weld doesn't even do that, on their positions. But essentially, they're left-wing Republicans, they're social justice warriors, and it's going to be a disaster for the Libertarian Party. Once again, the party is kicking itself, is beating itself up, and I thought my prediction is he'll do a lot worse than people think.
Yeah, well, I wish I was more enthusiastic. I'm not. I recall during the Republican debate, there must have been 8 guys on the stage, and they asked each candidate, what is the number one threat to America? And everyone, to a fault, every one of them said radical Islamic terrorism. One after another. 8 times I heard that stupid statement, and the answer to me, if I was there, it said it would be the mentality of the American people, and an abusive government that has trained our people to stop thinking. Our own government is our greatest threat to this nation. Unfortunately, it's the way the people think because they've been subject to this government for such a long period of time. Something along those lines. Would you sort of agree with me, or you want to argue that fact?
No, that's absolutely true. The only thing I would add to it is that the government's mouthpiece is critical, and that's the mainstream media. The mainstream media does the bidding of the government. Whenever the government wants to demonize a leader overseas, the mainstream media unquestioningly follows the government line because most of the sources of the media are the government. So we just put up an article on the Ron Paul Institute website written by a good friend of mine, Jim Jatras, called How the American Media Serves as a Transmission Belt for Wars of Choice. And it just details how the mainstream media backs up the government in any way, shape, or form. And that's why you get people reciting bumper stickers, incapable of thinking for themselves. But the one thing Jim points out that I think we should be positive and optimistic about is that the mainstream media is losing its grip on society. People don't trust it anymore because people are realizing what they learned when they lived in the Soviet Union, that the media are a bunch of liars. If you want to get any truth, you've got to read between the lines. Then you've got to turn to the samizdat's, which would be shows like yours, organizations like ours, the non-mainstream media, which is growing constantly. So people are learning what liars the media is and how the media does the bidding of the state, but it can't be quick enough for any of us, I don't think.
Yeah. Do you see all of this getting worse? And how would you predict things are going to work out? I mean, what's the end game here? Because we can't continue on the path we're going now. Either way, things are going to get so acute in some areas, for example, with the riots in the streets and the bifurcation of society, that one side or the other is going to win and the other side is going to lose. I don't know where it's going to fall. I'm a pessimist. I'll be honest with you. I don't think the good guys are going to win this. And then things are going to get exponentially worse. And with the economy the way it is, they're not going to be able to survive because the government right now is 19.5 trillion debt. If we exclude the 6.5 trillion that they forgot to book. I usually do that. 6.5 trillion, I put it in the drawer. I forgot all about it. But go ahead.
Yeah, but it's it's a number of things. You're right. I mean, things feel very ugly. They feel nasty. Yeah. But there's also the threat of a general war, and I think that threat is more acute than it's been at any time since maybe the mid-'60s, maybe the Cuban Missile Crisis. The U.S. and the neocons who run Washington are so determined to get us right up next to a war with Russia or China, to get us right up to it. And this is the sick, deadly cycle in Washington that they thrive on conflict. They're rich. The Beltway is rich. It's the richest part of the country. And they do that because they can bamboozle the rest of Americans to allow their currency to be debased to the benefit of the well-connected in Washington. to believe, as you say, it's all about radical Islamic terrorism. There are Reds under our bed. Putin's coming to get us. ISIS is next door. Keep people terrified while you pick their pockets. And that's what's happening. But Joe, you make a great point. How long can this go on? The Fed has done everything it can. It's lowered interest rates effectively to zero, if not worse, when you look at inflation, et cetera. What more can they do? There's massive stimulus, more massive purchases, the Fed purchasing shares in companies. What else can they do? They're out. They have no tricks left. It's the end of Keynesianism, and this Keynesianism has been what's fed our foreign policy. So I'm afraid when they're backed into a corner, which they are, something really horrific is about to happen.
Yeah. Well, Michael Tanner wrote a book. Michael Tanner? He's at the Cato Institute, I believe. He wrote a book about the U.S. debt, and I can't remember the name of the. Sally, remember the name of the title of Michael Tanner's book? I read the book and I can't remember the name, and it was some time ago that I read it. Well, he shows some graphs showing that our debt, past 2020, literally goes straight up. I mean, it's not even on a slight angle; it's straight up, and we can't afford the debt we have now. What happens when it starts increasing exponentially? Doesn't the currency have to collapse? I mean, even if nothing else, there's no outside influence. Eventually, someone's going to say, hey, this piece of paper that you keep on printing, I'd rather have a Zimbabwe dollar.
Yeah.
And then what?
Yeah. Well, the thing that I can't figure out is, obviously, the system will collapse if the dollar loses its reserve currency status. That may be a healthy thing ultimately. I think Dr. Paul would probably argue that.
Yeah.
But if everyone agrees that will be a huge displacement, a huge dislocation of our economy, then why on earth is the U.S. government doing everything it can to help bring that about?
Right.
Why are we pushing China and Russia into each other's arms? Why are we rattling sabers and turning countries against us? We're forcing sort of a Eurasian currency to rise somewhere to challenge the dollar. Is it a suicidal tendency? I don't know, or is it just stupidity? I don't know what the answer is, but it certainly bodes ill for not just the rest of us, but for the elites as well.
Yeah. Well, the likes of Jim Rickards and those guys who follow the financial industry say that, I think it's September either 27th, this month, the end of this month, the IMF is going to decide to include the Chinese yuan in the basket of currencies. I think it's 9.5% is what allocation they get, and together with the yen, and the U.S. dollar, euro, etc. And they say when that happens, people will tend to excuse the dollar from being the world's reserve currency. And once that happens, all the dollars overseas come flowing back here. So they say, enjoy your $25 loaf of bread from inflation, just from the extra dollars coming in. Do you have a feel for that at all? I can't imagine that happening, but it is going to happen, I guess.
Well, unfortunately, Americans won't recognize it until it's too late, because it's only people that are alternative, like Jim Rickards and like so many others, that recognize this. It's only people like Ron Paul who talk about how our foreign policy is going to come back to haunt us. These people are, the elites don't listen to these people. Don't listen to what they have to say. And people will not recognize it until it's too late. It's just like we did a show the other day on the Liberty Report where we talked about the erosion of our civil liberties, the attitude that, hey, I've got nothing to hide. I don't care if the government listens to my call. Well, by the time it trickles down and the average American feels Big Brother breathing down their neck, it's going to be too late. Yeah. The time to deal with it, the time for us to be worried about it and to try to do something is now, before the hooks get in us. But, we try our best.
But it's all the solutions are very painful ones. That means we have to get out of Afghanistan. We have to close all of our foreign military bases, which we should have done. We should never have had in the first place. We have to make peace, believe it or not. I hate to say this, make peace with everyone around the world and allow people to free trade with us. Radicalism right here. But all this makes sense. And the average person, if they heard that, they say, well, that makes sense. Why don't we do it? but then they revert right back to, well, we have to watch about the, Russia. We have well, why don't we just trade with them? No one is going to inflict harm on someone who is doing them well.
Yeah.
If we are doing something for a country and they need us for whatever reason, for making products, services, or whatever it is, they are not, as they're dealing with us, they are not preparing for war. They are preparing to sell us more stuff or have stuff made here. And yet when you speak that way, people look at you like, boy, you're weird. Where'd you ever get that concept from? But these are basic human concepts. These are not foreign policy concepts. I mean, if you have a next door neighbor, if you're nice to that person, most likely the guy's not going to punch you in the nose, right? But if you're nasty to him every day, there's a good chance that he's going to, run over your foot with his lawnmower. Why can't we apply basic human behavior to countries?
Yeah, and I mean, no business wants to kill its customer. That's the whole argument against the TSA. The airline doesn't want to be hijacked and bombed and blown up. They have much more incentive than some government bureaucrat to make sure there's no one on board who shouldn't be on board. But as it goes back to education, people have it drummed into their heads from an early age that the government's going to keep you safe, the government's going to protect you, the government's going to take care of you, and we become a bunch of mind-numb sheep, and that's the big problem.
Yeah, people don't realize that if one airplane a year of the tens or hundreds of thousands of flights, if one airplane a year went down, no one would fly. Really think about it. I mean, if in the United States, let's just assume the United States, could you imagine if every year one airplane crashed, a major airliner crashed? What would happen to the air? The number of people flying would go down exponentially. So you're right, there's a selfish motive to make sure that these things fly, they land safely, and everyone's happy. But we can't seem to do that. The same thing with this Black Lives Matter group. I hate bringing this subject up, but it's such a big issue right now. And no one asks the right questions. When they interview those people riding the streets, people say, we want equality, we want reduction of elimination of police brutality. No one asks them any questions. Say, why are they? How could you be on the street? Do you have a job? Have you graduated school? What does your mother and father think about this? Basic questions. No one asks. No one asks any of these questions because it's taboo. And you find out that maybe they don't have a father. You find out that their mother is disinterested. You find out they really grow up on the street, that they haven't graduated school. And by the way, 49% of all students in the United States who go to high school in cities, and not the big major cities, but all cities of any size, only 51% graduate. So there's a good chance these people haven't even graduated high school, are on the street all day, and they want to blame everyone else. And I go, I think it's the breakup of the family that has a big core element that's missing. You have no family, so you don't have... If I was in the street rioting when I was young, my father would come out and I would be in pieces. I mean, you wouldn't recognize me.
Your life wouldn't matter.
Oh, no, the little life matters at that point. And he'd be talking English and Italian. He didn't speak English very well, but I knew what he meant, boom, bada-bing, bada-ing, and everything.
Well, there certainly are grievances about police brutality, I mean, there's certainly something to it. We see a lot of it, but why feeling aggrieved by police brutality or the idea of police brutality gives you the right to go and steal someone's TV or break into Walmart and steal their stuff? That's the part I can't quite understand.
Yeah, I often think after they pillage and burn and do all this stuff and turn over the cars, they should leave everything there. Should not improve it. Just say, fine, this is your town. Now live with it. The grocery store, it's looted. That's exactly where it's going to stay. Then what are they going to do? But no, we go in there and we rebuild it and we make it even better than before, and then we have the same thing all over again. It seems that we do not learn from anything. I'm frustrated. You can tell I'm so frustrated, it's unbelievable.
I mean, I hate to bring it all back. You can bring it back to the Fed, though, in a way, because the Fed policy over the past, however many years has instilled high time preference in people. If you save money, you're an idiot. You actually lose money every year. So I think it instills in people this idea that I got to get mine now. I need to get a better TV and I can't afford it. I'm going to grab it. And this is the kind of the distortion that our monetary policy causes in society too. So definitely it's the family, but the Fed certainly helps out, in the way our monetary policy is managed certainly helps out.
How do you, do you mind if we break just for about 60 seconds for station identification, and then we'll be right back, Daniel?
Sure.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much for holding on. Folks, this is Joe Cristiano. You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. With us, we have Daniel McAdams. He's the Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Hold on. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Thank you.
Where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
We didn't have our, what about the ads? Okay. All right. Folks, welcome everyone back to Liberty Talk Radio. I guess we had a goof up, didn't we? That's okay. That's okay. We have a little goof up. That's all right. We don't need the ads. Advertisers will forgive us, you know. I'd probably get shot when I leave the studio, but that's another story. And a lot of people will be happy if I'm shot when I leave the studio. With us today, we have Daniel McAdams. He's the Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. We're talking about everything and anything what's wrong with America today. So please call in with your comments and your opinions and your questions. 646-652-4620. If we can put the banner up there, that'd be helpful. 646-652-4620. Press the one button if you'd like to break in and ask a question. Whoop, almost. We almost have that right. There we go. Yay, there we go. Okay. Daniel, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Now we have Daniel in a ghost environment. That's good. We're having a little trouble with our board. There we are. We're back again. All right, now that I have vented and you made me feel better, my blood pressure is down 10 points. If you had to evaluate, give a force rank the three major issues that are facing America today, whether we're addressing them or not, how would you list them?
Well, I think really the number one issue is the threat of war, and I think it's greater now. I just did an update for our institute, and I think it's greater now than it has been, as I mentioned, since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Flashpoint Syria, the U.S. Just bombed earlier this week. 62 Syrian troops were fighting ISIS in eastern Syria. The Syrians and the Russians claim that the U.S. knew what they were doing. They kept bombing for about an hour and basically destroyed this outpost. The Russians have spent too much time, energy, and money trying to keep Assad in power and trying to keep the fight against al-Qaeda and ISIS on track to let this go, I think. And we've had a bombing of a humanitarian convoy. The U.S. immediately blamed the Russians and Syrians, but they did it in a mealy-mouthed way. They didn't say, hey, Russia, you bombed it. They said, well, you knew where the convoy was, and it got bombed anyway, so it's your responsibility. But this ratchets things up. And the Chinese in the South China Sea are not going to back down. The U.S., the last time I looked, does not border the South China Sea. We do a lot of business with Chinese boats going through that area, and the last thing they want to do, as we spoke of earlier, is destroy those sea lanes and not let us trade with China. But the Chinese are not going to back down. But what do? We send warships over there. We fly B-52s over these rocks that they built up in the water. These provocations are so dangerous. It just takes a misunderstanding. It just takes pushing a little too far, not knowing where the red lines are, until you have a major conflagration that could literally wipe out life on Earth. This is pretty serious. I mean, I grew up in the Cold War. I remember as a kid ducking under the tables.
Yeah.
And who would have thought we would come back to it after communism died its own death from its own contradictions? Who would have thought we'd come back to a situation like this? So I guess that's a long number one, so I should probably skip out on 2 and 3.
Well, I mean, but why? Why do we do this? I mean, it's insane. I hear the argument. Well, the Chinese buzzed our ships, or the Russians buzzed our ships. I go, well, and they say that's not right. And I said, well, how many Russian ships or Chinese ships are in the Gulf of Mexico? They go, oh, no, we wouldn't allow that. I go, wait a minute. They can't seem to see the contradiction in what they're saying. Again, it goes back to the mentality of the American people. They can't think.
Yeah. And if you said that, they would say, well, you just love Putin, which is, it's the reduction to absurdity. It's a reduction to absurdity. It's this, it really is. I mean, I can imagine what it may have been like in Germany in the 30s or even Italy, to a lesser extent under Mussolini. People just parroting was like that in the Soviet Union. I think the term came from the French Revolution, the wooden language. Everyone speaks the wooden language, which doesn't convey any accurate information. You love Putin. You don't want to go to war. You must love Putin.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to admit something that I should admit, but when I see Putin on television, and I know he's no saint, no angel. I mean, there's a lot of, probably he's done things that are horrifying or whatever. But I tend to have at least more respect for him as a leader than I do our own president.
Well,
and
I think
I hate to admit that, but I'm being truthful, and I'm not saying that in a hateful manner. I just, at least he stands for something. I don't even know what our president stands for.
You're being Trump.
What's that?
That's what Trump said.
Oh, Trump said that, so I must be right.
You love Putin and Trump. It's a dumb. You're out of here.
No, Sally here is in the studio. She's a Trump fan. I haven't broken it from that yet.
But it's for whatever else you'd say about the Russians. The one thing that they're not doing is trying to remake the rest of the world in its own image, and that's the big difference between this muddled U.S. foreign policy that botches every time it tries to do it, and what I see as Russia's foreign policy. They do protect their what they perceive to be their national interests, but they're not over in Latin America trying to foment some revolutions over there like we do constantly everywhere. So in that sense, it's not even a matter of admiration. It's just that they seem to be a lot smarter than Washington.
Right.
Although, again, as I say, Washington fools the rest of the country. They live in big mansions, and they have all of the amenities of being extraordinarily rich, while the rest of America scrapes and struggles.
Right. Well, if you look at Washington, D.C., those people inside the Beltway are the richest people in the United States. Those people right outside the Beltway are the poorest people. And I think someone should look at it and say, I think there's a problem here, and it's not the people in Wisconsin. It's the people in the Beltway. And these are the people that we keep on voting for. I mean, we need a revolution in our own mind. We need to be all revolutionary. Like I said, we need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action, and we've stopped doing that.
Yeah, but I think, thankfully, we have tools that we could never have imagined, even 15 or 20 years ago. A program like yours and a program like Dr. Paul and I do every day on the Liberty Report, that would have been impossible without the technology we have. So,
that's correct.
In a way, it challenges us to do better. It challenges us to make better arguments, to be more motivated, to be more energized, to try to better our ability to convince people that something is really wrong. And the answer is liberty. The answer is individual freedom and individual responsibility. And but we should be thankful that we have the tools. Dr. Paul always talks about when he first started getting interested in libertarian principles, you'd have to write a letter to FEE and send it off, and a few months later you'd get a book back in the mail. And you look at something like the Mises Institute now, and you have a library you could read from now until the end of your life,
right,
and never exhaust what something like the Mises Institute has available. So we should be grateful for what we have. We just need to be smarter in how we use it, I think.
Why is it that we have so many people who are starting to think this way, and so many organizations, very, very small to relatively large organizations, and they're all pushing, and there's such a high level of frustration with both major candidates, and we don't see more people jumping ship into the libertarian camp?
Well, I think a lot of people identify with libertarianism. They may not know it. And that goes back to, unfortunately, we have a terrible salesman in the Big L Libertarian Party candidate. It's a terrible salesman. He's not selling real libertarianism. He's selling watered down libertarianism. He wants a carbon tax. Is that serious? He's going on about global warming. He should be talking about the real issues that libertarianism stands for. And it is a disaster. But I think a lot of people do understand it. I think they're afraid of the word because they think of libertarianism. They think as you're a libertine. All you want to do is smoke pot, and have multiple partners or whatever it is. And that isn't the case. And I've sort of dedicated myself, aside from what I do for the Institute, to trying to convince people who are normally socially conservative, maybe traditionalist minded, that if you want to practice your way of life, the federal government is your biggest enemy. Yeah. And you need to look at our movement. It's not just for sort of crazed pot smokers, nothing against them as long as they don't aggress against me, of course, but trying to convince people that are more traditionally minded that this is really where you belong.
Yeah. I very rarely mention the fact that I'm a libertarian to anyone. Of course, on the program, I do it. When I was with 1170 KFAQ, and I did that as a hobby too, because I just wanted to get the word out. And I said, I don't use the word libertarian because I said, people in Oklahoma, if you say libertarian, they say, oh, you must be one of those gay guys that like to dance around in the street in your dirty underwear. I mean, that's the vision. I'm not kidding you. I mean, I'm being as accurate as I can because they have no concept of what it is. They cannot think that far. It's either Republican or Democrat. And most of the people here in Oklahoma, many people are, conservatives, and they make absolutely no sense whatsoever. I go to the dog park with my dogs, with my wife and all that. And typically we get involved. I have my Liberty Talk Radio t-shirt on. They go, what's that? And we start talking. And of course, they always want to say, we have to, be more conservative. Or I'm a conservative and, we need to protect America. We need to build a military. All the typical. And when you start asking them questions, so how are we going to do that? Why are we doing that? And they don't have any answers. But the answers they do have make absolutely no sense. And yet we haven't been able to break down that wall.
Yeah, I think the militarism that's unfortunately invaded our churches, especially I have to say the Christian right is a disaster. Forget about Jesus as the Prince of Peace. That's over. Yeah. That guy's a loser. We need to go out there and conquer. And that's a real problem. But, I think when you talk to people who are very religious, you could tell them, wouldn't you like to have the other half of your paycheck that you could give to your church or a religious cause that you like? The state is coming between you and your religious faith. That's why the state is your enemy.
Yeah. I worked many years ago. I worked for a large company that closed down the processing center that I was in charge of at the time, and they let everyone go. And I didn't know what I was going to do. Things were kind of tough at the time, and got kids in school and the whole bit. And of course, I was eligible for unemployment for about a year. And I passed by the unemployment office and I looked at it and all the people standing online. And I said, I can't do this. And I went to my wife's audiology practice that we just opened up, and we were just dead broke at the time. I mean, dead broke at the time. And I walked in and I said, well, it's time for me to go in business for myself. And I actually never collected one penny that I was actually entitled to, and I paid into and the whole bit. I couldn't see myself standing in line asking someone for a check. I never forget that day I sat there in this one room, and my desk was the top of an older building, beautiful building, Utica Square Medical Center, and my desk was the top of a radiator. and today I have the largest occupational health testing company in the state of Oklahoma. No. But and I'm not patting myself on the back. I said, but that's people are driven that way and they succeed. But once they say, well, I'm going to take the easy way out and stand online and then go home and watch television all day, nothing happens. And the government enables people. Government is the biggest enabler in the world, and the worst thing you can do to people is enable them. I tell people that, and I have parents say that, oh, the only time I give to my children is when they need it. I said, isn't that interesting? Because the only time I give to my children is when they don't need it. I said, when they need it, they have a problem. They have to figure it out. And I give them some examples, because it'll take too much time on this program. I would give you some examples that would really make you laugh. But they were very tough decisions to make, where I told them, no, thank you very much, and hung up on them when they were literally starving, But every one of them became a success. And we all speak to one another, and we laugh over it today. But everyone who said, okay, Johnny, I'll help you, every one of them became enabled, and they became crippled mentally as well as physically. They cannot work anymore. And the government does the same thing. The government is the biggest enabler in the world and destroys the spirit, the American spirit, bar none.
And it comes back to control. Once you give someone welfare, you control that person. You control their voting habits. You control their eating habits. You control their personal habits. And it's all about control, and governments are all about control. So anyone who doesn't want to be controlled should think about opposing government, should think about what we don't like to call libertarianism, but really is libertarianism,
right. Yeah. And enabling is the worst, is the cruelest thing you can do to people. Now, my sister doesn't understand that at all. She's very wealthy, and they support many families. And I told her one time, I said, that's the worst thing you can do. And she was insulted. She says, with all the money, the thousands of dollars we give out every month to all the people in the family, without us, they would be unable to function. I said, that's my point. She hung up on me. And I'm kidding you. She hung up on me. I haven't heard from her in 2 months. And she's angry with me, but she doesn't understand that principle. I hate to inject personal stuff, personal family stuff. But it's the truth, and it's a shame, because I didn't mean to be mean. I didn't want to be disagreeable. I'm just saying that's not a good thing to do. Amy, don't do that stuff, And oh boy, she was mad. But I feel very strongly about that. Let me ask you this. If in fact we have a currency crisis, what do you see coming from that? Do you have any idea of what happens?
Well, I see, the middle class has already been eroded, since 1915. But think about a currency crisis with the level of debt that people have, with the mentality that people have, with the non-recovery since 2007, 2008, with the inability of people to withstand even having their internet go out for a half an hour. I think you will have chaos in the streets, and I think it's only a matter of time before something like this happens. You can't sustain the warfare welfare state. LBJ tried it with guns and butter, and look what that got us. It got us the stagflation of the 70s and so on. This is going to make that look like child's play, I think, and there's no way of avoiding it. The only thing we can do now is make it worse, which is what they're doing.
Well, what we're experiencing today, as we speak, in Charlotte, North Carolina, if there's a currency crisis, would we not see that in every state, in every city, major and minor? And would that not spell absolute chaos and require some sort of military control of the government or the streets? That's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah, well, that's why a lot of people suggest anyone who can get a second passport to do so immediately. And I think that's pretty good advice, actually, because if that starts happening, it'll take a while for it to trickle down to Lake Jackson, thankfully. But, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be in a real bad way very quickly.
Yeah. Well, you have an extra bedroom in your house that I can. I'm only kidding. But I see the ugliest. I have the ugliest vision of what would happen, even if there's a slight change in our monetary situation, where the government is not able to do everything it's doing now. I see havoc. We may have the slightest change, or we don't increase something a certain amount, and we have pandemonium. I can't imagine what could happen if things really get bad, where the U.S. dollar doesn't buy what it can or did before, or people are not getting the same amount of money that they were getting in previous years, or they've become accustomed to. I see nothing but almost chaos. Like we see chaos basically in Carolina.
Yeah, and look at all the countries overseas where the U.S. intervenes and creates chaos. And I think a lot of Americans look down on these societies. Oh, they're so primitive. Look how they're out in the streets, That was caused by our foreign policy. And we're not immune from that, because any kind of dislocation, probably to a much lesser degree than a bunch of bombs dropping, will produce that same kind of chaos in the United States, And they're going to soon see what happens when society breaks down, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I hope that we have the foresight to say, hey, why don't we close all the military bases? We can't afford them anymore. Bring everyone home and free up society to rebuild itself. I know that's pie in the sky, but that's the only way I can see us working out.
Well, the thing about it, and I mentioned it on the show with Dr. Paul today, non-interventionism is not a utopianist philosophy. It doesn't say, hey, if we just stop our interventionist foreign policy, it's going to be, the world's going to be a wonderful place. It just means that it's going to be less messed up than it is now. So if you want to take less bad versus keep doing what we're doing and make things worse, then non-interventionism is your choice. And interventionism has run its course. It has produced nothing but rotten fruits. It's time to cut down that tree.
Yeah. All right, Daniel, we're almost getting to the witching hour. In the next couple of minutes, could you tell our audience what they should do, how should they prepare if they should, and what is your prediction?
Well, I think people should mentally prepare for the worst. They should stay away from the mainstream media as much as possible, other than watching it as you would watch an animal in a zoo,
Yeah.
And they need to turn to alternative sources. They need to turn to responsible alternative sources. I mean, you don't want to go off the rails, but there are a lot of people like yourself and Dr. Paul and others, and who are doing their best, who are trying to educate people, and people who are so inclined philanthropically should support an organization that's doing the work that you think will help. And I think communicating and keeping abreast of things is so very important.
Yep. Let me ask, Sally, you've been sitting here very silently. Do you have any questions for Daniel?
No, Joe, you answered every one of them. Thank you.
Everyone. I spoke for you, Sally, didn't I? Okay. Well,
I'm being Abraham Lincoln.
Okay, Abe. Thank you very much.
It is best to remain silent.
Well, Daniel, I want to thank you so much for being our guest today.
You're a terrific guest, and I hope you will accept our invitation to return at a later date and give us some updates.
I'd love to. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you so much. Folks, this is the end of today's program. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, but let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well. Stay tuned.